Welcome back to The Overlook. I'm your host, Dominique Hoffman, and in today's episode, we are going to be looking at the sad news coming out of Boulder, Colorado, following this past Sunday's attack on pro-Israel activists advocating for the return of the hostages, as they do every Sunday, except this Sunday an attack opened up with Molotov cocktails being thrown at them, burning at least 12 activists who were then hospitalized as a result of this hate crime, an attack against pro-Israel activists and Zionists. And this unfortunately seems to be an emerging trend. No longer is this anti-Israel rhetoric just debated in the political space or across university campuses, but it is manifesting into hate crimes and to the deaths of Sarah and Yaron a few weeks ago. We still remember the horrific murder that took place outside of the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., cutting their young and promising lives short only days before they flew to Israel to start their lives as a newly engaged couple. And so we're going to examine what happened in Boulder, Colorado, and then we're going to look at just trends of anti-Israel hate that is occurring here in the United States, in the West, in the civilized West, the West that promised never again. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I'm going to look at what happened in Boulder, Colorado, but I really want to emphasize that this is just another event in a growing pattern. And the United States and the West at large, which has turned against Israel and against its own Jewish citizens here in America, or even in the West at large, is promoting an environment where suspicion towards your Jewish neighbors, where alarming accusations of pedophilia or being part of a Jewish cabal that runs the United States or being genociders or being sympathetic to genociders has become a very mainstream and accepted narrative. And you have individuals like Candace Owens who have been pushing this idea of the Jews as inherently evil and as agents of the devil, which is nothing new. This is a restoration to rhetoric from before the Holocaust. But the difference is today we have the Holocaust as an example of what that rhetoric leads to, even in civilized society, in Western society, roughly 80 years ago. And so while we have all these free thinkers proposing these Jewish conspiracy theories as an answer to government corruption and elite corruption and pulling back the curtain and showing America who's really behind all of the evils in society, is not new. It's not revolutionary. It's actually regressive. And it's a remembrance to rhetoric from a time bygone where Jewish hatred was prevalent. Antisemitic tropes were a cornerstone of cultural and political life in society for countries across the West. And so we're seeing what promoting, or at least creating an environment that entertains anti-Semitic tropes like we've seen since October 7th, what that leads to. And what that leads to is anti-Jewish hate crimes, right? Very rarely does hateful speech just exist in academic circles or policy circles or online and on YouTube and not in the real world. There's eventually spillover where there's ideas motivate action. And we've seen that happen just in the last 2 weeks with both Sarah and Yaron's murder in Washington, D.C., and now with this crime in Boulder, Colorado. So while you have a large swath of the right rebelling against social taboos or rhetoric that is deemed impermissible because the woke left essentially policed our rhetoric for so many years, there is this radical reaction to say outrageous and controversial and edgy things in the name of free speech. And I just want to warn that there is a middle ground. The right doesn't have to swing to such an extreme end where now, the R word to describe someone who is specially abled or mentally handicapped, or the F word, which has been repopularized to describe a homosexual. Those terms don't need to now become popular as some sort of a revolutionary social declaration against the woke left's policing of our rhetoric over the last 4 years. There are some things that should remain social taboos, and that's okay. That's not an inherently woke left idea. And we now have a right who's embracing really radical things, even like Kanye West in his new song, saluting and promoting Nazi propaganda as like edgy and art and a reaction to the woke left. We can still have common sense in society. And now we're seeing that groupthink take over large swaths of the political right in America. So what happened in Boulder, Colorado? Again, it's downstream of an environment that has fostered anti-Israel rhetoric. So what happened in Boulder, Colorado this past Sunday was horrific. An Egyptian immigrant who had overstayed his visa in the United States opened not fire. He did not use a gun as his choice of weapon. He couldn't actually obtain a gun. And so he planned this attack for over a year because every single Sunday, these pro-Israel advocates would walk in Boulder, Colorado to advocate for the return of the hostages. So he had over a year to plan this attack, in which he threw Molotov cocktails into the crowd of pro-Israel activists, burning at least 12 of them who have now been hospitalized. At the point of this recording on July 3rd, at roughly 3:40 in the afternoon, New York time, there have been no reported casualties, thank God. But there were horrific testimonies from the scene of the crime of individuals with their skin essentially melted off. Very, very gruesome descriptions that were very heartbreaking. And because of how gruesome they were, I chose not to include that in this video, but there is that testimony available on YouTube if you do seek that out for yourself. And so this gathering happens every single Sunday. And Mohamed Soliman, an Egyptian national overstaying his visa in the United States, enacted this terror on this pro-Israel crowd. This happened, like I said, this past Sunday. At the time, I guess, of this article, 8 people had been injured, and I saw reports of 12. And reportedly, he was screaming, "Free Palestine," a very, very similar rally call to what the perpetrator who murdered Sarah and Yaron in Washington, D.C. just a few weeks ago was also screaming, "Free, free Palestine." He threw the Molotov cocktails, and he later told investigators that he wanted to, and I quote, "kill all Zionist people and wish they were all dead." And this is according to an FBI affidavit that has since come out. So this just marks an intensification in anti-Jewish hate crimes, obviously, since the horrific murders of Sarah and Yaron, who I just mentioned, which is but 2 weeks ago. And then we also had the incident of Governor Josh Shapiro's Pennsylvania home being lit on fire during Shabbat. And these are some recent examples of anti-Jewish hate crimes that have now become more and more commonplace. The group that was meeting was part of the Run for Their Lives, which is a global group that meets to run or walk to advocate for the return of the hostages. This is a picture of the perpetrator. I typically do not like to give their names even any spotlight, but Mohamed Soliman's, I think, identity as an Egyptian national overstaying his visa is important because I think it also addresses the immigration of the last administration and how so many either overstayed their visas or came through the southern border who were from the Middle East, are men of militant age or older. A lot of the asylum seekers we saw coming through the southern border were not young women and children. Many of those who were unfortunately being human trafficked. Is absolutely horrific and horrible. But the majority of these men who came into the United States have now disappeared across America, and we see Mohammed kind of popping up as an example of the ideology that came through the southern border or those who overstayed their visas. And there is an internal threat in the United States for ideology such as anti-Zionism, but also Islamism. And I think we've yet to really see that threat materialize. But it's a threat that I really want to warn the audience is definitely a real threat. And I think we're going to see that come to fruition in the years to come. President Trump tweeted out in regards to this. He said, "Yesterday's horrific attack in Boulder, Colorado will not be tolerated in the United States of America. He came in through Biden's ridiculous open border policy, which has hurt our country so badly. He must go out under Trump policy. Acts of terrorism will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. This is yet another example of why we must keep our borders secure and deport illegal anti-American radicals from our homeland. My heart goes out to the victims in this terrible tragedy and the great people of Boulder, Colorado." Now, something I want to affirm in President Trump's statement is that this cannot be tolerated. We cannot tolerate terrorism. And what we've seen with the deportations of even green card student visa holders who are advocating for the destruction of America on our university campuses have since been deported. But speaking back to that threat I was hinting at, there is an ideological threat within the United States to tear down America, whether it be far left radicals who have a Marxist bent and want to see, our country completely destroyed and then rebuilt to create some sort of Marxist utopia, or if it's individuals who are far right or they hold Islamist ideologies, and they also share a desire to see the West fall. And the United States was infiltrated under the last administration's extremely weak foreign policy and immigration policy. Now, the one thing I do wish President Trump had noted in this statement is the ideological danger as well. So we have a physical danger with all these immigrants in the United States not knowing what their ideological or political bents are and how that might affect American citizens through acts of violence. But he doesn't name, he says it's an anti-American radical, yes, but he doesn't name the ideology, which is anti-Semitism, which fueled this hate crime. He also didn't link this to the death of Sarah and Yaron, which I believe was a missed opportunity on his part, especially with how he has held a very hard line with some of our top and most prestigious universities and Ivy League schools in the United States and withheld funding for their inability to respond adequately to anti-Semitism on their campuses. I think he could have really emphasized the ideological through lines with some of his policies. And I don't think it should go unnoted that it is the culture of anti-Semitism in America that needs to shift and change. And an individual like President Trump is someone who holds so much influence over the American populace, especially the right, which is leaning very, very anti-Semitic, shift the culture. And so, unfortunately, I think we've also seen a shift in the Middle East when it comes to Israel. And I'm really praying that that's not a trend we see continue throughout the rest of the Trump presidency. Again, I want to highlight, because I didn't actually talk about this on my podcast at the time, the death of Sarah and Yaron, who were attending an event at the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. They were gunned down by a Palestinian or pro-Palestinian activist with very, very similar aims to Mohamed from the Boulder, Colorado incident. And they were shot and killed. They worked at the Israeli embassy. They were promising and extremely bright young professionals. And they were also about to leave to Israel, where Yaron was going to propose to Sarah. So to see their lives cut short, even if you don't agree with them politically, we've also warped what morality means here in the United States, because people hold Palestine up as this moral symbol. And so anyone who cooperates or supports Israel in this worldview then forfeits their ability to protection or their Western and their inherent inalienable rights in the United States. And this is really dangerous moral equivalency that's happening on the pro-Palestinian side, especially on the left, which is obviously void of any religious underpinnings or guidelines for morality. And they're making up their own morality, which then justifies these horrific hate crimes. And again, this is an example of what all the college students for the last almost 2 years have been screaming about, which is globalizing the Intifada. This is what the Intifada looks like. Back in the second Intifada, there was a horrific attack, the Delphinarium discotheque or nightclub bombing that happened in 2001 during the second Intifada in Israel. The bombing happened in Tel Aviv at a nightclub where a Hamas militant detonated himself. It was a suicide bomber, killed 21 Israelis, 16 of whom were young Israeli teenage girls, many of them whose families had just actually immigrated from the Soviet Union. And that's another example of how violence against innocent civilians, I believe almost all of the casualties from the 2001 attack were civilians. I believe there might have been one IDF officer who was counted amongst the casualties. But again, there's this justification that that is legitimate form of resistance, that blowing yourself up or throwing firebombs at pro-Israel activists or shooting Israeli embassy employees in cold blood on the street of Washington, D.C. is then justified in the fight for Palestinian self-determination. And it's this extremely warped view, again, of morality and of social justice. And both sides of the political aisle here in the United States, the left and the right, have bought into this lie. And what makes me so disheartened is that it's happening on the conservative right, which is largely characterized by Christian principles. And that's where we're seeing also the rise of supersessionism, because promoting anti-Jewish hate or characterizing an entire people group as evil goes against every principle as a Christian. But if you can demonize the Jews as a spiritual enemy to Christianity, as many individuals have throughout all of history, but thinking of Candace Owens again, then you can make an exception to even the Christian standard of morality when it comes to the court of public opinion within the Republican Party, which again is shifting extremely fast away from Israel at a rate that I was not expecting to see. I've been covering the woke right and Trump's foreign policy in the region. I used his last administration as a predictor of where his foreign policy would go in his second term. And we are definitely seeing a shift. And again, it's largely because of the I don't want to even say Israel bias. It's anti-Israel, but it has nothing to do with the sovereign nation of Israel, and it has everything to do with the people who comprise that sovereign nation, which are the Jewish people. And there's this spiritual warfare that is actually happening, and this spiritual blindness that is occurring on the political and religious right in America, which is either endorsing rhetoric that leads to incidents such as the Boulder, Colorado incident this past Sunday, or it's silent when these hate crimes happen. And these are our Hebraic brothers and sisters. Yes, we are not part of the same faith, but we as Christians owe our religious roots to the Old Testament. And there is something that intrinsically connects us to the Jewish people. And even if your theology doesn't leave room for that, as an American, these Jewish individuals have the same inalienable rights as me and you. And it's our job to protect them, lest the West fall and America fall with it. And with that, I will leave you. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the Fearless Project channel for more content like this. If you live in the Boulder, Colorado area, we have a program where we deliver white roses to the Jewish community. And so if you'd like to be a part of that, you can contact me at the email I will put in the description box below. I will see you guys in the next episode.